Okay, so this is abuse later in life, and basically this week I'm going to try to focus on making a video or multiple videos related to this. I believe it's just called abuse later in life. And there's a wheel development. So let's go ahead and read this. In early 1980, the Duluth Domestic Abuse Intervention Project asked women attending the domestic violence educational group to describe their experiences of being battered by their male partners. The Duluth Power and Control and Equity Wheels were created using the most commonly repeated tactics. There are many additional abusive behaviors experienced by women that are not on the wheel due to the small space available. In 1995, NCALL staff asked facilitators of older abused women's support groups to have participants review the Duluth Wheel. These older women were asked if their experiences of abuse in later life were different or similar to younger victims or survivors. Participants from handful of groups in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Illinois generously provided feedback. The older women's suggestions were used to create the Family Abuse in Later Life Wheel by NCALL. In 2005, NCALL took the Family Abuse in Later Life Wheel back to older survivors and asked them to review the wheel once again. Over 50 victims from 8 states responded, many telling us that the wheel reflected the abuse in their lives. However, it did not adequately represent the ongoing psychological and emotional abuse they experienced throughout their relationships. The attached wheel illustrates this reality. The outer rim of the wheel defines violence or the threat of violence that is evident in the relationship. The violence may be frequent or very limited, but fear and threats are present. The abuser uses threats to maintain power and control. Each of the pie pieces represent the different tactics abusers may use in a relationship. Abusers may not necessarily use all of the tactics, or they may use one tactic more often. Any combination of tactics can be used to maintain power and control. This wheel makes a distinction between emotional and psychological abuse. Emotional abuse is specific tactics such as name calling, put downs, yelling, and verbal attacks used to demean the victim. Psychological abuse is the ongoing manipulative, crazy making behavior that sometimes an overriding factor or tactic in abusive relationships. Sometimes it can be very subtle and sometimes it can be very intense and invasive. The center represents the goal or the outcome of all these behaviors, power and control. Okay, so now we have this fact sheet including tactics used by abusers. So this could be like its own video. Tactics used by abusers: physical abuse, slaps, hits, punches, throws things, burns, chokes, breaks bones, creates hazards, bumps and or trips, forces unwanted physical activity, pinches, pulls hair and twists limbs, and last but not least, restrains. Okay, I think everybody can agree that all of those are very abusive things. So let's talk about some of the less obvious things like threatening. Threatens to leave and never see elders again, or threatens to divorce or not divorce, threatens to commit suicide, threatens to institutionalize abuses or kills pet or prized livestock, destroys or takes property, or displays or threatens with weapons. Okay, so the next category is sexual abuse. And here are some examples of tactics in sexual abuse. Makes demeaning remarks about intimate body parts, is rough with intimate body parts during caregiving, takes advantage of physical or mental illness to engage in sex, forces sex acts that make the victim feel uncomfortable and or against the victim's wishes. Last but not least, forces victim to watch pornography on television and or the computer. Next, psychological abuse. Withholds affection, engages in crazy making behavior, publicly humiliates or behaves in a condescending manner. Emotional abuse. Humiliates, demeans, ridicules, yells, insults, calls names, degrades, blames, uses silence or profanity. And back over here to the right side, targeting vulnerabilities. Takes or moves walker, wheelchair, glasses, or dentures. Takes advantage of confusion. Makes victim miss medical appointments. Neglecting. Denies or creates long waits for food, heat, care, or medication, and does not report medical problems. Understands but fails to follow medical therapy or safety recommendations. And last but not least, refuses to dress or dress up inappropriately. Denies, and last but not least on this page is denies access to spiritual traditions and events. This tactic involves denying access to ceremonial traditions or church, ignores religious tradition, and prevents from practicing traditional ceremonies or events. Oh, we are not even done. There's a whole nother page dedicated to these tactics. Whoo! Okay, how long have I been here? 7 minutes. Okay, let's make it a half hour. Tactics used by abusers. Using family members. Magnifies disagreements, misleads family members about the extent and nature of illnesses or conditions, excludes or denies access to family, forces family to keep secrets, threatens and denies access to grandchildren, leaves grandchildren with grandparent without honoring grandparents' needs and wishes. Next on the tactics abuse involves is ridiculing personal and cultural values. Ridicules personal and cultural values, makes fun of a person's racial background, sexual preference, or ethnic background. Entices or forces to lie, commit a crime, or do other acts that go against the victim's value system. Next, isolation. Controls what victim does, whom they see, and where they go. Limits time with friends and family, denies access to phone or mail, and last but not least, fails to visit or make contact. Next, using privilege. Treats victim like a servant, makes all major decisions, ignores needs, wants, and desires, undervalues victims' life experience, takes advantage of community status like racial, sexual orientation, gender, and economic. Next, financial exploitation. Steals money, titles, or possessions. Takes over accounts and bills and spending without permission. Abuses a power of attorney. Tells elder money is needed to repay drug dealer to stay safe. All right, next. These are domestic abuse in later life, tips on working with victims, and we'll start here at Ask About Abuse. Lead into questions about abuse with a statement such as, because many of the people I work with are hurt by family members, I ask questions about relationships and abuse. The questions may include, how are things going with your spouse or your adult child? Are you getting out with your friends? Are you afraid of your spouse or other family members? Have you ever been hit, kicked, or hurt in any way by a family member? And does anyone threaten you or force you to do things you do not want to do? Have you ever been forced to do sexual acts you did not want to do? Is this going on now? If yes, ask for more information and ask questions such as, how are you staying safe? If no, state that if a family member ever does hurt you, or you know someone who is being hurt, there are people who can help. Feel free to contact me for information if you ever need it. So here are the red flags, things to listen and watch for. First, from a potential victim, has repeated accidental injuries, appears isolated, says or hints at being afraid, considers or attempts suicide, has a history of alcohol or drug abuse, including prescription drugs, presents as a difficult patient or client, has vague chronic complaints, is unable to follow through on treatment plans or medical care, and may miss appointments, exhibits severe depression. Next, from a potential abuser, is verbally abusive to staff in public, or is charming and friendly to service providers, says things like he's difficult, she's stubborn, he's stupid, or she's clumsy, attempts to convince others that the family member is incompetent or crazy, is, quote, overly attentive to the family member, controls the family member's activities, refuses to allow interview or exam to take place without being present, and talks about the family member as if he or she is not a person. Types of abuse. SFY 2010 substantiated reports. 58% were self-neglect. 19% was neglect. 9% was financial exploitation. Physical abuse only accounted for 7%, and mental abuse 6%. And two of the least 2% is other exploitation, and 1% is sexual abuse. So neglect, self-neglect, and neglect are the top substantiated reports. So here's a table: 8 3-year comparison of adult protective service reports, 3-year comparison of adult protective service reports. Total reports received, reports investigated, total reports substantiated. There were not. I'm sure they will be able to explain the pattern because I'm not seeing the pattern. But anyway, housing what they learned, they had they kind of measured success on total reports substantiated, unfounded, pending, and invalid. Dispositions of substantiated reports includes the needs and accepts services and need no longer exists. See, I'm not really sure. This is like a little bit crazy getting into my statistics class, which I already barely remember. Virginia Department of Social Service Adult Services Program Report. This is a program report. Number of reports by each person. And here we go. Here's the fact sheet. Sexual violence in later life. Sexual violence can affect individuals across the lifespan, including people in later life. Many older victims have survived multiple victimization over the course of their lives. Recognition of sexual violence against people in later life is hindered by misconceptions that older adults are not sexual beings or sexually desirable, and that rape is a crime of passion. I'm not gonna lie, this was like a huge number on my list of why I wanted to get sober and away from this abuse, because I realized if I didn't do anything now, I could literally still be getting abused in a nursing home. So I literally just had this it was just so bright, and I was just that can't happen. Or at least like I need to be responsible for making sure that like if I see a bad path, I'm not going to go down it, So like definitely that was one of my big like rock bottom moments. Like this is only going to get worse from here unless I get out of this situation and make myself very, very like distant and like at the same time making myself like a individual and not just someone that they can control. Whew, okay, let's do this. A high percentage of victims experience significant health problems and disabilities that increase vulnerability and reduce help seeking. Advanced age does not protect one from sexual assault, but rather increases risk in many ways. The National Center on Elder Abuse in 2007 defined sexual abuse as non-consenting sexual contact of any kind, including unwanted touching, sexual assault, or battery, such as rape, sodomy, and coerced nudity. Sexually explicit photographing, and sexual contact with any person incapable of giving consent. Jurisdictions and agencies define elder differently, but typically as commencing at age 60 or 65. But you know what I mean? It's like you only get the 3 stages in life. You're young, and then you're regular, and then you're old. And I already spent young and regular being sexually abused, so I'm like I only have 1 left. I don't want to keep happening, and so yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they. Yeah, I guess like everybody deals with it in their own time, but it's just like I don't know. It's heavily like just like difficult to connect with people about something that to me just like seemed so clear. But anyway, okay, injuries. Due to age-related psychological changes, older victims tend to sustain more serious physical and psychological injuries during an assault than younger victims. Some of the signs and symptoms of sexual violence against people in later life include genital injuries, human bite marks, imprint injuries, and bruising on thighs, buttocks, breasts, face, neck, and other areas. Fear, anxiety, mistrust, and dramatic changes in the victim's behavior. Eyewitnesses report and disclose by victims observed suspicious behavior or perpetrators by others. Next, barriers to response and prevention. It is likely that sexual violence against people in later life is highly underrepresented. Many barriers impede the effective response and prevention of sexual abuse against older victims, including social stigma and barriers, preventing individuals from discussing sexual activities or sexual violence openly. They're not really numbered. Disabling conditions that interfere with making reports, victims' fear of further harm, victims' reluctance to report, especially if the perpetrator is a family member, misinterpretation of disclosure as part of dementia, and of physical evidence as, quote, normal markings on an older body, delayed medical and police assistance, and contamination of physical evidence. I'm going to try to read this. Various jurisdictions and agencies define the, quote, elder portion of life differently, but typically as commencing at age 60 or 65. In contrast, the National Clearinghouse on Abuse in Later Life considers older victims to be those over the age of 50. I believe there was just something on the news like about like this football player attacked this old man or something. I was like, oh my god, I want some noodles. Did you guys order noodles? So then we got like kind of like a bunch of statistics. But let me go back here to this. This isn't even a full page. Okay, so let's go on. We got 10 more minutes before I get worried about my memory. Victims. Most identified older victims are female. However, male victims have been reported in almost every study. Okay, let's see. In addition, genital injuries occur with more frequency and severity in postmenopausal women than younger age victims. Older victims are also more likely to be submitted to a hospital following assault, and victims ranging from age 60 to 100 experienced psychosocial trauma whether or not they could discuss the sexual assault. There was no significant difference between those with and without dementia and post-abuse distress symptoms. Perpetrators of sexual violence against people in later lifespan a wide range in age and can be juveniles as well as older adults. In most perpetrators of sexual abuse against people in later life have special access to victims as family members, intimate partners, fellow residents, or care providers. Most identified offenders are male. However, female offenders have also been identified. Persons who sexually offend older adults within their families exhibit characteristics of mental illness, substance abuse, domineering or sadistic personalities, sexual deviancy, and sexist views of wives as property. Next, sexual offenders who are older adults are typically not held accountable. National Institute for Justice and Research demonstrated that the older a victim is, the less likely the offender was found guilty. For more information on how you can work to address and prevent sexual violence against people in later life, please contact your state, territory, or tribal coalition against sexual assault and or the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. And the fact sheet was developed by Holly Ramsey, I can't say that, PhD, and is part of a sexual violence in later life information packet. Now we got a bunch of statistics here, so I'm going to try and go through them pretty fast. Research on abuse in later life. The United States grows older. The population of persons 65 and up in 2030 is projected to be twice as large as it was in the year 2000. Persons reaching age 65 have an average life expectancy of an additional 18.5 years, 19.8 years for females, and 16.8 years for males. The three fastest growing 5-year age groups in the United States since the last census were 50 to 54-year-olds at 55%, 45 to 49-year-olds at 45%, and 90 to 94-year-olds at 45%. 52% of elderly live in 9 states: California, New York, Florida, Pennsylvania, Texas, Illinois, Missouri, Ohio, and New Jersey. Projections indicate that by 2030, the composition of the older population will be more diverse: 72% non-Hispanic white, 11% Hispanic, 10% Black, and 5% Asian. So next, the growing older in the United States. About 415,000 grandparents aged 65 or more had the primary responsibility to their grandchildren. The median income of older persons in 2004 was $2,100 for males and $12,000 for females. For 1/3 of Americans over 65, Social Security benefits constitute 90% of their income, and 3.6 million elderly persons, or 9.8%, lived below the poverty level in 2004. Another 2.2 million, or 6.4%, were classified as near poor. Reported cases of elder abuse are increasing. In 2003, over 500,000 cases of abuse and neglect were reported to Adult Protective Services throughout the United States. This represents a 19.7% increase from the 2000 survey. For every case reported to authorities, 5 more go unreported. Only an estimated 30% of sexual assault against the elderly ever get reported to the authorities. Elder abuse is often family violence. According to the Adult Protective Services survey done in 2004, 89.3% of elder abuse reports occurred in domestic settings. As a 1999 study also found that many victims had difficulty taking care of themselves and that family members were the primary perpetrators of sexual abuse. Next, a significant portion of elder abuse is spouse and partner violence. A study of 257 older women ages 50 to 79 found that 32% had experienced physical abuse or threat from their partners at some point in their lives. In a 5-year study done of 1,057 victims, 65 and over, received domestic violence program services, and 71.2% reported physical abuse. Next, abuse in later life turns deadly. 8% of all women in single female victims, single male offender homicides reported in 2003 were 65 years of age or older. Each year, more than 500 homicides, suicides, or 1,000 deaths occur in persons 55 years or older, which means that nearly 20 older Americans die each week from homicide, suicide. A Florida study found that persons aged 55 and over had homicide, suicide rates almost twice that of persons under the age of 55. 75% involve a husband who kills wife before killing himself. 75% abused elders are more likely to end up dead at the age of a 13-year follow-up period than self-neglecting or elders who are not abused. 25% of homicide suicide perpetrators age 55 years and older have a history of domestic violence. Sexual abuse occurs in later life. And this is the last but not least of this video. A study of 284 cases of sexual assault against victims aged 60 and older reveals that 70% of the victims were assaulted in their homes. 23.2% were assaulted while living in an institution, and 4.8% were assaulted in other locations. Of the 284 victims in this study, 261 were female elders, and 6.5% were male elders. 4 of the 284 victims did not identify a gender, and there were 210 male offenders and 20 female offenders in cases with data. More than 60,000 rapes of women older than 50 years of age are reported annually. Abusers are often dependent on their victims. Whew. So yeah, I will look forward to editing this video, making it like super cute. Might not be tomorrow, but I figured it's a pretty good start. Remember, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, you can call the hotline. And they also have a 24-hour chat. And so on that note, I hope that you guys keep coming back, because it works if you work it, and subscribe, like this, and tag your friends, and I'll see you later. Bye.